Welcome to the Same Day Podcast, where we discuss driving incremental business growth and other topics related to real estate, property management, and entrepreneurship. Now, to the show at hand.
Hi there, Yoni Schmidt, hosting today's episode of the Same Day Podcast, where I connect with top business and real estate leaders. Some of them have included Chip Gabrino, local restaurateur, entrepreneur, Elliot Nelson from the McNally's Group, and Morgan Martin of Merrill Lynch. Today's episode is brought to you by Keyrenter Property Management. At Keyrenter Property Management, we are a full-service property management company helping our clients build wealth by removing the headache of real estate ownership. We can help you buy, renovate, and manage your assets. Go to keyrenterpmc.com or email us at info@keyrenterpmc.com for more information. Today, I'm excited to host Tom Schwab, the godfather of podcast interview marketing and the founder of Interview Valet, the leading concierge-level service in the industry. He's helped thousands of introverts, consultants, coaches, and thought leaders harness the power of podcast guesting to grow their businesses authentically. He's also the author of the must-read book, Podcast Guest Profits. And today you can get ready to learn how podcast interviews can convert 25 times better than blogs and why they might be the most overlooked tool in your marketing toolkit. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Yanni, I am thrilled to be here. This is a timely and timeless topic here. You know, today it's not only people that are listening to these podcasts, but the AI that refers them. So it's a powerful tool that anyone can use.
Yeah. Before I dig into my questions, let's dig into what you just said. So when you say the AI tools that are listening to these podcasts, you mean, Google's Gemini and ChatGPT and GenSpark and all these tools are crawling the interwebs to essentially find authority, companies who are authorities in their respective industries?
That's true. They're really looking for human content, right? Human content is the fuel for AI. And so they're looking for that wherever they can. And, I've heard a estimate that 90% of the written content on the internet is AI generated. And the problem is
Wow.
that AI trains on AI. It's like making a copy of a copy of a copy, and it becomes a downward spiral. And so they are looking for human content, and they believe, rightly so, that the kind of conversation we're having now is human content. So they're indexing it, and that's why you're seeing people that do podcast interviews, that do podcasts, are showing up so much higher in the AI recommendations. And, May of 2025, AI became our best referral source at Interview Valet. And there's studies now that have come out from Cornell that says that traffic from AI converts 9 times better than SEO. And we've definitely seen that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So is it enough to just put your podcast episodes on YouTube and, just let it sit there? Or what would you recommend?
I don't think it's the old SEO tools anymore. I was talking to somebody just recently, and they're like, oh yeah, our SEO company said we have to transcribe all of the podcasts and put them up on our website. And I'm like,
in HTML format, so that basically Google is crawling and seeing it, or?
That's what they were saying. But I'm like, okay, well, if you want to do that with your SEO company, that's fine. But guess what? They're already transcribed when you put them up on YouTube. There was a American with Disabilities Act that said you had to transcribe them. So your site probably doesn't have the authority that they're pulling from there. They're already pulling from iTunes and YouTube. So they're crawling all the video, all the audio, just looking for the new content.
Yeah. So for business owners who are, marketing is, probably one of the most important functions that they do, right? Because that's, where your leads will come in through your top of funnel. So putting it on YouTube may not just be enough. Would you say, taking it a step further and linking those podcasts on your website through YouTube through a widget or something like that? Because how do you gain ultimately authority on your website if your podcast is on YouTube and on iTunes and on Spotify and all these mediums, but not necessarily on your website, which is where you want to drive the traffic to.
Yeah, the world is changing on there. And I heard Dharmesh Shah, who's the co-founder of HubSpot, and he runs a company called Agent AI. And he got up there and said, that in the future, there'll be 100 or 200 websites. And everybody was like, you're kidding me. And he thinks there's more and more consolidation going there. So, are people reading my blogs on my website, or do they read them on Substack? Do they see my newest comment on my website, or do they see it on LinkedIn? At the end of the day, I don't care where you see me, as long as you see me, right? So from that standpoint, I think that we can create in the way that's easiest for us, and then repurpose in the way that's easiest for clients, right? And be everywhere they're looking. So the idea of, we could take this interview and take out the shorts and the reels, and people will watch those on different platforms. They'll still see us, right? You could take and make blogs out of it. You could take quote images, right? Great example is, they say that Joe Rogan gets heard by 100 million people. Think about that. There's not 1/3 of the US adults that listens to his 3-hour podcast. And if you look at the data, he gets 2 million downloads per episode, right? #1 podcast. The other 98 million are listening to a 60-second clip or a 90-second clip and saying, oh yeah, I listened to the interview with Elon Musk. And from that standpoint, as long as they get the keynotes or the key points there, as long as they brought back to you, to find you, to engage with you, that's what really counts.
Yeah, it's that soundbite, I guess, is really what counts. So, I mean, it's important, I guess, you're saying, to cut up your podcasts and, share it, and I guess sprinkle it across all sorts of other mediums.
Yeah, and I think it's like other marketing, right? What do they say? You have to have how many touch points before somebody engages with you?
Like
so
7 or
whatever it is, and maybe it's that first touch point is seeing a reel and going, wow, that's a really interesting idea. And then they see it again and they go check out your LinkedIn profile, or go to the your website, whatever that is. And it's like, how can you make it easy for them, right? The idea that my ideal customer is going to, subscribe to my Substack and read every one from beginning to end. Heck, I don't think my wife even does that. So I got to make it easy for everybody.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for that. Let's dive a little bit into some of the questions that I prepared. You've coined the term podcast interview marketing. What exactly does that mean, and how is it different from traditional podcast, PR or just guest booking?
Yeah. I cringe when I hear podcast guesting, right? Because most of the time people are just podcast guessing, right? They're just going on random shows. And I'm an engineer by degree. So I believe everything has to have a strategy and a plan behind it. And too many people, PR agencies and podcast bookers out there, are just saying, well, if you go on enough random podcasts and just talk about random things, good things will happen. All right. Well, if you believe that, then why don't you just go to Times Square and just talk to random people? Because, sooner or later, you're going to talk to the right person. And well, you can hope that works, but hope is not a strategy. So we have looked at it for the last 10 years of, this is a marketing channel. This is a strategy. And so the podcast interview is just a small portion of that. That's like the performance, but you still have to use the data to find the right shows. You have to prepare for the show. You have to do the best practices to make it easy for someone to go from being a passive listener to an active visitor to an engaged lead. And then, like we talked about before, just don't do more interviews. Do more with every interview, right? You'll promote this interview, and as a guest, I should promote this also. So it's the idea of, the interview is a part of your marketing system, not the entire thing.
Yeah. How would you advise, I guess, podcasters like me and Matt who, host guests on the Same Day podcast? I don't know. We have maybe 400 subscribers on our YouTube channel. Not we're not Joe Rogan by any means. But what would you advise us to do, I guess, or anyone who wants to increase, the amount of subscribers, and what's the best way to, increase the percentage of engagement with our listeners?
Yeah. It's interesting. There's the best place to find podcast listeners is listening to podcasts, right? The best place to find YouTube viewers is viewing YouTube. And I remember years ago, Pat Flynn pointed that out. And so the idea of if you can go other places where your ideal audience is, you can bring that audience back. And some people will do that from advertising, right? I'm going to advertise on shows that are similar to mine. Maybe I'll guest on their show, right? Maybe I'll invite them to be on my show because then they're going to promote it to their audience too. It's this idea of if you could go into stocked ponds, right? If you were fishing, right? Wouldn't you want to go to a pond that you know is already stocked? And that's what going into other people's audiences are. And that's the same reason, if I was trying to grow a business, am I going to start my own magazine from the very beginning or my own television station? No, probably I would just try to get featured in there, or I would try buying advertisement on there. So it's the idea of leverage as opposed to just brute force.
Yeah, interesting. That's some good advice. Tell us, what makes podcasts such a powerful medium for introverts and deep thinkers to build trust and grow their business? I mean, the answer may be a little obvious, but from your perspective.
If it was obvious, I didn't catch it at the beginning. It wasn't until about a year ago, one of our clients, Matthew Pollard, who wrote the Introvert's Edge, brought this idea to me. And when I started to look at our clients and ask them, I found that the vast majority of our clients, and especially the great ones, self-identified as introverts. And I thought that's really interesting because often introverts prepare more, which is what you need to do to be a great guest. They are better on one-on-one conversations, which is what you do as a podcast guest. And they are awful at small talk, but they love diving deep into their area of expertise, which is what you do on a podcast. And I really think today, this idea of you've got to be loud and obnoxious and the carnival barker in order to grow your business, it almost works against you, right? We all have seen the obnoxious influencers out there that are maybe well known, but not well trusted, right? And there's a lot of them that are getting now investigated or indicted by the federal government, right? And so
or the French, what is it, president?
Yeah, and it's like these people that are celebrities, people don't trust anymore. So I think it's really more those deep thinkers, the introverts, the humble heroes. I think they're the ones that really, really excel on podcast interviews.
Yeah. So let's dive a little bit deeper, like you say. Can you break down why traffic from podcast interviews converts 25 times better than a blog post or traditional content marketing?
Oh, when I saw the data on that originally, I was like, wow, how can it be, how can it be 4 times better? And if you think about it, if I'm just scrolling through Facebook and I see something, okay, I click it. I'm not really thinking that much about it. So if I listen to someone, if I listen to you for 30 or 45 minutes, I've either turned you up or turned you off, right? So if I come back to your website, if I click on something after hearing from a podcast, you would expect it to convert so much better, right? And there was that study out of Cornell even that said traffic from AI converts better than SEO. So if I'm just doing a quick Google search, maybe I click on the top one, right? If I'm doing an AI search, they said that the first prompt was 29 words on average. So forget keywords anymore, right? They're having this whole discussion. And that the user talked with the AI an average of 9 minutes before they came to your website, right? So it's this idea of they were asking the questions and they either heard the right thing and continued, or they stopped because they heard the wrong thing and fine, they went another direction. At the end of the day, we don't want just more cold traffic or leads. We're optimizing for profits. And how do you get profits? From ideal clients that value what you do. So I think that's really where we're seeing that from things like AI through conversations on podcast interviews, you're not only seeing the traffic converting better, but we're seeing sales close faster and also for a higher initial amount, which is what we're all trying to get.
Yeah, interesting. Tell us a little bit about, what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when they appear on a podcast as a guest, and, how can they avoid them?
A few. I would say there's three major ones. The first one is that more is better. This is just a numbers game, right? Just go out there and do more. And I reject that. I think you should be very targeted. You should do more with your interview. So that's the first one. The second one is do different interviews, do different topics, talk about different things. And I've seen so many people that will come to me and say, I did 50 podcast interviews last year. And if you listen to them, they did one interview, 50 different places. And it sounds silly, but if I came to you and said, I posted a weekly blog every Monday last year, and you look back and it was the same blog every Monday, you'd be like, you don't get credit for the last 51 weeks. So that's the second one. Do different topics, do different focuses there, because that way when people hear your different interviews, they're going to be looking forward to the next one, not just thinking, oh, I've heard this before. And the same way with the AI, it's going to be indexing new things. You can repurpose it. So that's number two. And then number three is at the end of the podcast interview, they're going to say something like, so Yanni, how do people find out about you? What's the next step? I think sometimes people forget the medium, and they'll say, you can email me here. You can call me here. I'm here on YouTube. I'm here on Instagram. And they start just confusing people. And they forget the medium, that most of the listeners are driving, they're multitasking, they're hearing you sped up. So they get to the end and it's your great way to close, and you end up just losing them and confusing them. So I always say at the end, make it easy. Just send them to one place and then tell them what they can find there, right? Give them an easy thing to come back to, something that takes a little bit more time. And, if they hear Yanni and you're the answer to prayer, don't slow them down in a funnel. Let them talk to the wizard.
Yeah. So you're saying it falls flat with call to action at the end.
Just make sure it doesn't confuse them. Just send them to one place. And some people will get to the very end and they'll say, so Yanni, how do, any final thoughts for the audience? And they'll just end with, no, that was good. Thanks for the conversation. And it's like, you can only help people so much, right? And if they want to take that next step, make it easy for them. It's like, how bad do you have to hate somebody not to tell them what the next step is? Or sometimes I'll hear people say, well, podcast interviews don't work. And you start listening to the interview and it's like, well, why did you think that was a good audience? Right. Well, if you were fishing for sharks, you shouldn't be in fresh water, right? If you're fishing for fish, don't go in a swimming pool, right? So it's like you didn't even have the right audience. Or at the end, you went fishing, but you didn't put any hook out there, right? There was no next step for it. So you had a nice conversation on the podcast, but why did you expect to catch any clients from there?
Yeah, that ties a little bit into ROI, which I'd like to talk about. How long would it typically take to see tangible results from podcast? Let's not call it guesting, as you hate, but podcast hosting or producing. And what are the kind of the results that people should realistically expect?
Yeah. This is a marathon, not a sprint, right? So if you need results in 24 hours, throw money at Facebook ads or Google, because you're going to throw the money in there. They'll show you what the results are. And then the next day you've got nothing. Content is a long form play, right? And especially with interviews, most podcasts are booked out a ways, right? The mean time between when you reach out and they invite you, and then it gets scheduled, and then it gets recorded, and then it gets edited, and it goes live. Currently, that's 83 days. So you may feel that this was a good conversation, but you're not going to see the results until it goes live, typically in about 83 days, right? But you're going to start seeing these results. And some people just want better leads that close faster for a higher initial amount. Okay, that makes the cash register sing. But there's so much other that you can get from it, right? You can get the social media following, right? Pulling more people into your orbit. We've got people that launch books with it. They launch shows or podcasts with it. You've got the thought leadership, the brand differentiation. Heck, even keynote speaking can come out of this, right? Somebody hears you on an interview and they're like, that's really interesting. We've got a conference. Could you speak at the conference? We see that. And then there's also the search engine optimization impact, because every time you're on a podcast, they're giving you an earned backlink. And that's always valuable. And then that whole thing with AI, where the AI is listening to it and they're repurposing it. So there's so many different ways that you can get value out of it. And the value builds upon itself, right? Every interview builds on the next one. I don't know if the traffic is evergreen, but it's probably like a can of soup, right? Good for 3 to 5 years. I had a client that heard me on a podcast interview with Jamie Masters. Jamie's got Eventual Millionaire. She's like one of the OGs in podcasting. I did the interview in 2018, and this person reached out in 2024, and we get on a call, and one of the first questions he asks me, Yanni, is, "Oh, when did you grow the beard?" I grew the beard the end of 2019. He didn't recognize me, but all he had done is he'd seen my video with her, and he thought I'd be timeless and never age. But I just left it as just recently, right? But to him, the content that we were talking about in 2018 impacted his buying decision in 2024. I can't say that I did a Facebook post in 2018 that had any impact 5 years later.
Yeah, interesting. Well, you've worked with, lots of clients, over 1,500 clients now. Tell us a little bit about, the type of industries or professionals that you see benefiting the most from podcast interview marketing. And is property management or real estate, one of those industries?
I think so. From the standpoint of what works best is when it's a relationship sale, not just a transaction. And let me explain this, right? If it's a product, you can compare products, right? You can sell a product. If I'm buying a computer, I can look at the spec sheet of one or the spec sheet of another, right? If I'm looking for somebody to do property management for me, right? That I'm betting on the jockey, right? It's like, I've got to trust you. I've got to talk with other people. I've got to know what your heart is there. So that really works well. It works great for services. And also for real estate, right? Both for, we've worked with a lot of times where people are investors, they're
Hmm.
syndicators, they're in
Hmm.
the profession, right? Um, Getting a mortgage, right? It,
Yeah.
it, it's a, it is a, you could say commodity product. A mortgage is a mortgage. But I tell you what, the person that you work with is going to make a huge, huge difference there, right? They're going to either
Hmm.
make it easy as anything, or they're going to make it a nightmare. And so many of those things there, you've got to trust the person. So it works well for that. It also works well the bigger geographical range you have. So if I've got a business here in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and you've got to
Hmm.
be within 5 miles of my location to be a customer, all
Yeah.
right, it it would work, but it's not efficient, right? So the entire US is listening to the podcast, but only a small segment is going to be clients. But if you've
Yeah.
got something that's bigger, like we've had a client that we've worked with, great idea. We do a lot with category design, right? Different
Hmm.
ideas. And he's talking about co-living. And Grant Shipman is the
Yeah.
co-living guy. And
I've interviewed him on this podcast
oh,
because of Interview Valet. So thank you. Sorry.
he he changed the way I looked at the world, right?
Hmm.
This idea that maybe we're not all supposed to live by ourselves. Maybe we can take this house, this big house, have a lot of people living in it that are there because of the other people too, and that it cash flows a whole lot better than trying
Hmm.
to sell it to one family. And that idea of going out there was so powerful because anybody that heard his idea could say, oh, I could do that, or at least it
Hmm.
makes sense. And then you look at it and go, well, how do you do that? That's where you go back to Grant and he can show you exactly how to do that.
Yeah. I call it the professional model for house hacking when you don't
And
live there.
so many of things with I call it category design. It's based off of a book called Play Bigger. Once you have somebody show you that, show you the
Yeah.
future, it's hard to um, ever look at it the other way, right?
Right.
And of like, why would I want to rent a crappy little studio apartment when I could have a be part of a great house with, 4 other people that I really get along with, and it's got a pool in the back and everything? That sounds like a whole lot more fun. And
Hmm.
just because you have never been exposed to it. So I think people with big ideas, a different point of view, people that can talk about what the problem is, right? Here's the problem the world is facing. Here's the solution I see. If you agree with me, come along, right? People should
Yeah.
turn you up or turn you off.
Nice. Love that. We talked a little bit about advice that you would give guests who come on the podcast, but on the other end of it is, a founder, a business owner who's hosting this podcast, right? What advice do you have for these founders or business owners who, are nervous about stepping behind the mic for the very first time?
Yeah. Um, and people will ask me, should you be a guest or a host? And I like depends your goals with that, right? Should I
Hmm.
be an Uber driver or Uber passenger? I don't know. It depends your goals, right? So I think being a host is a great way to build the relationships, to nurture your current leads and your current clients. Being a guest is a great way to go out there and get new exposure, get new leads. And one of our clients, I learned so much from our clients. Um, she guested on a number of podcasts before she started her own podcast. And she
Hmm.
said she couldn't imagine doing it any other way. And the example that she used was, you know, she had been in bridal parties before she planned her own wedding, right? And she says
Hmm.
it's different to see a wedding when you're just sitting out in the seats as opposed to if you're in a bridal party. And she's like, if I all I had ever done is listen to a podcast, I don't think I could have been as an effective podcast host. And we even work with some production agencies. We call it phase zero. If you're getting ready to launch a podcast or a show, right? It takes a while to spin that up. So
Mm-hmm.
while we're doing that, we go out in what's called phase 0. Go out on other people's show, sort of see how they do it, practice on their audience as opposed to your own, and then talk about your show, right? The best place
Mm-hmm.
to find, like we said, podcast listeners is listening to podcasts. So talk about it. And then they say, so Yanni, how can people find out about you? They can say, oh, just come back to here and we can talk about, the same day show, and you can subscribe to that. So it's a great way that both of them can work together.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. I wanted to ask you started answering this question by mentioning phase 0, but where should someone start if they want to build a strategy around being a podcast host, and how could they work with Interview Valet if they want a, I guess, done for you approach?
Yeah. I always say start with the end in mind. And I take care of all of the discovery calls. If you come to Interview Valet and want to be a client, it's an interview process. You're interviewing me, I'm interviewing you. And I'll tell
Mm-hmm.
you what, the first question I will always ask you is that nobody wants to do a podcast interview, right? It's a hobby, right? What you want is the results that come from being that, right? So what are the results you're shooting for, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you start a show, when you start guesting, when you start doing anything, what's the goal for it? What does success look like? Because the ugly fact in podcasting is that 80% of shows die within the first 10 episodes because people don't have the why am I doing it? So I think the first thing is to start with the end in mind. Why are you doing it? Next one is, who do you want to talk to? Right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole world doesn't want to hear you. The next thing would be, what do you want them to do with the information after they hear you? What's that next step? How can we use this in the form of the marketing? And then I always say the next one is, why now? Right? There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things you could do. Why is this the next step in your success? And we go through all of that. And I think it's important to think through all of that. Um, I think, I believe, I won't say I think, I believe that too much in marketing today, everybody is just trying to sell their crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of you need this app, you need this course, you need this. No, yeah, don't tell people what you should do, right? Just ask them what they're trying to do, and is this the next step? Often we do the right things, but we don't do them in the right order, and then wonder why we don't get the results with it. So I'm always looking at that and saying, if your limitation is that people just don't know about you, they don't trust you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how are you going to make that happen, right? Probably not going to build a lot of trust sending cold emails, right? You're not going to build a lot of trust or a lot of authority doing TikTok dances, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can you be in the rooms where people are listening? How can you build that authority? How can you build the relationships with people that already have your ideal clients? So that's what we talk about.
Nice. You mentioned earlier pulling people into your orbit. So I guess one of my final questions would be, who do you think I should interview next?
Oh, that is a great question, right? And we'll talk about that afterwards also. I would say I've got an opinion, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you've got an opinion. And one of the things I've learned is that we all have opinions on our business. We hire consultants, right? Everybody's got an opinion, but the true answers come from our clients, right? Our listeners. They will tell us what they love and what they loathe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we got to be smart enough to give them more of what they like and less of what they don't like. So if when this comes out, you look at the analytics and said, man, that was like one of the worst interviews I ever had with Tom Schwab of Interview Valet, right? Well, is that right or wrong? It's the truth, right? If that's what the data
Mm-hmm.
says. So then say, well, why do I think that is? And you can start to go through and see what the audience likes and what they loathe. And I think this is something that's even very interesting with the use of AI right now. That sometimes we have our bias in there of what we personally liked or didn't like. I think you could go in and take the transcripts of all your different interviews and then tell AI what kind of engagement it got from each one and say, what does my audience like? What topics do they like? What kind of people do they like? And that is a great way to use it, where we can use the real feedback from people.
Yeah, love that. Tom, if anyone wants to reach out to you, Interview Valet, where should they go?
You can just go back to interviewvalet.com/TSD for the same day, right? Easy to remember. You go back there. I'll put all of my social media. There's a assessment, right? 10 questions. Will podcast interview marketing work for you? I put a copy of my book back there. You can buy it on Amazon. I'll send you a free copy. And then if you'd like to talk with me, I'll put my calendar there. So all of that is back at interviewvalet.com/TSD.
Great. We'll put that below so people can have easy access to it. Tom Schwab of Interview Valet, thank you so much for your time today and joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, Yanni.
Thanks for listening to the Same Day Podcast. Tune in to a new show each week and be sure to subscribe to get future episodes.